Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. This time we're exploring masks, and not just the physical ones, but masks as metaphors.
Oh, that's a fascinating topic.
You gave some really great material for this deep dive.
Absolutely.
And specifically, I think we should center this around Joseph Campbell's book, Masks of Eternity.
Yeah, that's a great place to start.
So how about we start with this idea of masks as metaphors?
Sure, yeah.
One of the sources defined it as, masks serve as metaphors for the different roles individuals adopt throughout their lives, representing various facets of their identities, experiences, and social interactions.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, it really speaks to that kind of like shifting self that we all present, depending on the context, you know?
Exactly. And I was thinking about that too, like how we all kind of put on these different masks depending on if we're at work or with friends or with family.
Yeah, it's this inherent duality. You have the mask itself, which is the face you present to the world.
Right.
But then underneath, you have this whole other world of complexities and desires and fears.
So it's like this shield that protects us from being vulnerable. But it's also a mirror reflecting back parts of ourselves that we maybe don't always want to see.
You hit the nail on the head. That's exactly it. And you see this throughout mythology, too, all these masked figures.
Like gods and goddesses. And
heroes and tricksters.
Right.
And so many cultures used masks in their ceremonies and rituals to connect with the divine or sometimes to channel spirits. It was like a bridge between the human and the supernatural.
I was reading about the Egyptian god Anubis.
Yes.
With the jackal mask.
It's a powerful image.
And it wasn't just a decoration, right? It symbolized his role in helping souls transition to the afterlife.
Yeah, it's not just an aesthetic choice. These masks have such profound meanings.
Yeah, so much deeper.
Yeah.
It makes me think about Joseph Campbell's work and how he talked about myths as this window into the human psyche.
He was really onto something with that.
Like we can gain a lot of insights into our own personal journeys by understanding these symbols and narratives. And it makes me think about the whole concept of the hero's journey that he talks about.
Ah, yes. The hero ventures out, faces all these challenges, and comes back transformed.
Yeah, and it's not just about these physical adventures, right? It's about that inner psychological transformation that we all go through.
Exactly. It reflects our own struggles and the potential we all have for growth. And you can see how masks play into this. I mean, literally, the hero might wear a mask.
Right.
But they also put on these metaphorical masks as they take on new roles and face different challenges.
And that brings us to something else that I've been thinking about, like the role of masks in storytelling.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Masks have been used in theater and performance for centuries.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the Greek tragedies.
The actors wore masks to exaggerate all those emotions, like joy and sorrow.
Right, and anger.
Yeah.
And it just allowed the audience to experience those feelings on this really visceral level.
Absolutely. It amplifies the emotions and makes them so tangible.
But they can also be very subtle and nuanced too, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Think about the masked ball scene in Romeo and Juliet.
Ooh, that's a good one.
The masks add all this mystery and intrigue, and the characters can act out their desires and fears in a way they couldn't otherwise.
It's like they give them permission to step outside of themselves and explore different parts of who they are.
And that exploration is key to personal transformation.
It is, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
in everyday life, we put on those masks, not just to protect ourselves, but also to experiment with different parts of our personality.
Trying on new masks can be so liberating. You discover hidden talents, confront fears.
It's amazing. And it makes me think about those eternal masks that Joseph Campbell talks about, those archetypal figures that connect us to something bigger.
Ah, yeah, those are fascinating. We should dive into those next.
Let's do it. I'm really curious to explore that.
These eternal masks, they aren't about hiding who we are. It's more about recognizing the universal roles that we all play in this grand narrative of human existence.
So not putting on a facade, but actually tapping into something much deeper, something that connects us to this collective human experience.
Exactly. And Campbell thought that these archetypes, like the hero, the trickster, the caregiver, they're embedded in our collective unconscious.
Interesting.
And they're reflected in myths and stories across cultures throughout history. They speak to these really fundamental human experiences.
And that reminds me of how, even though these stories come from such different times and places, they still share these similar themes and characters.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the hero's journey.
Right.
It's a pattern that pops up again and again in myths from ancient Greece to indigenous cultures all over the world. The hero goes out, faces trials, and comes back transformed. It speaks to this deep desire we all have for growth, for overcoming obstacles and finding our place in the world.
Yeah, it's like those myths are giving us this roadmap, you know,
Yeah.
a way to navigate life and find meaning in everything we go through.
And what's beautiful about these eternal masks is that they're not fixed or static. We might embody different archetypes at different points in our lives, depending on what we're facing and the roles we're called to play.
So how would these eternal masks actually show up in our everyday lives? I'm curious to hear some examples.
Sure. Let's take the caregiver archetype. This mask is often associated with nurturing empathy and compassion.
Okay.
So you might see it in a parent caring for their child, or a friend lending a listening ear, or a volunteer dedicating their time to help others.
Like a perfect example. It shows how these archetypes aren't just limited to these mythical figures. They're present in the everyday moments that really shape our lives.
Exactly. And if we understand these archetypes, we can navigate those interactions with more awareness, more intention. Like if you recognize the caregiver within yourself, it might inspire you to cultivate those qualities of empathy and compassion in your relationships.
So it's about recognizing those patterns,
Right,
those
yeah.
masks, and then using that knowledge to be more conscious, more intentional in our actions.
Exactly. And remember, these eternal masks, they're not about trying to be perfect or fit into some kind of mold. It's about recognizing the archetypal energies that are already within us and understanding how they influence our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors.
You know, this all makes me think back to something we were discussing earlier about how masks function as both a shield and a mirror.
Yes. The shield is all about protection,
Right.
presenting a certain face to the world that helps us move through social situations and maintain that sense of safety.
Right.
But that mirror aspect is just as important. It's about looking inward, recognizing those archetypes we embody, the masks we wear consciously and unconsciously.
And through that self-reflection, we can gain a much deeper understanding of our motivations, our strengths, and our weaknesses.
Exactly. It's about becoming more whole, more integrated by acknowledging and embracing every part of ourselves, even those shadow sides we might try to hide.
That's really powerful. So these eternal masks aren't just about connecting us to this broader universe. They're also about helping us connect more deeply with ourselves.
Absolutely. And it's through that self-awareness, that willingness to confront our own masks, that real transformation can begin.
This is all coming together now.
Yeah.
We've talked about how masks work as metaphors,
Yeah.
how they represent duality, how they make storytelling so much richer, and how they can help us grow as individuals.
Right.
And now we're seeing how these eternal masks connect us to something so much larger, those archetypal patterns that shape human experience.
And this is where Joseph Campbell's work becomes so relevant in today's world. Even with all our modern advancements, we're still grappling with those same fundamental questions about identity and purpose and our place in the universe.
So even though these myths and archetypes are from ancient times, they still have meaning for us today.
They offer this timeless wisdom, a way of understanding the human condition that transcends cultural boundaries and historical eras. By tapping into these eternal masks, we can find guidance and inspiration as we navigate the complexities of modern life.
This has been such an insightful conversation. We've covered a lot, but I'm still curious about one last piece of the puzzle. We talked about how masks help us connect with this broader universe. But what does that actually look like? How do we make those connections real and meaningful?
That's a great question, and it takes us into some really fascinating territory. By understanding these eternal masks, we can start to see how our individual lives are woven into this fabric of the cosmos, connected to something much greater than ourselves. So we were talking about how those eternal masks can connect us to something bigger, right? Those archetypes like the hero, the caregiver. But what does that connection actually look like? How do we experience it?
Yeah, I'm really curious about that.
Well, it's about recognizing that our lives aren't just these isolated events, but they're threads woven into this much larger tapestry. The challenges we face, the roles we play, the transformations we go through, they're all echoes of these eternal patterns, these archetypal journeys that have been unfolding forever.
So it's like seeing our own lives reflected in those big narratives of mythology and history.
Exactly. Like the story of the phoenix rising from the ashes. It's such a powerful metaphor for resilience, for overcoming adversity and becoming even stronger because of it. And you can see this archetype reflected in so many personal stories. People who have faced setbacks, who've gone through dark times, but who found a way to rebuild and renew themselves.
Wow, that's such a powerful image. It makes me think that even when we're struggling, we can find comfort and inspiration in knowing that others have walked a similar path before us.
Absolutely. Those eternal masks, those archetypal stories, they remind us that we're not alone in our journeys. They connect us to a whole lineage of human experience, to a collective wisdom that goes beyond time and culture.
You know, that reminds me of something Joseph Campbell said about the power of myth. He believed that myths weren't just these ancient tales, but living stories that could guide us in our modern lives.
Exactly. He saw myths as a kind of psychological roadmap, giving us insights into the challenges and opportunities that are just part of being human. And those insights are just as relevant today as they were centuries ago.
So how can we actually tap into that wisdom? How can we use those eternal masks to find meaning and purpose in our own lives?
It starts with paying attention to the stories that we connect with, the myths that really capture our imaginations. Which characters do we identify with? What themes keep showing up in our lives?
It's like we're all drawn to certain kinds of stories, certain archetypes that speak to our own journeys.
Precisely. And by exploring those stories, by reflecting on the archetypes that we embody, we can understand our own patterns better, our strengths, our weaknesses, and the challenges we're meant to overcome.
It's like using those eternal masks as a lens to view our own lives.
Exactly. And through that self-reflection, we can start to see how our individual stories are connected to something so much larger, to a cosmic dance that's been going on for millennia.
This has been an incredible deep dive. We've explored so much: the duality of masks, their role in mythology and storytelling, their potential for personal transformation, and how those eternal masks connect us to a bigger universe. It's really given me a whole new perspective on the power of masks and the deeper meanings they hold.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you. I hope it's inspired you to think about the masks you wear in your own life, not just the ones you show to the world, but also the ones that reveal who you truly are and the journey you're on.
Absolutely. To our listeners, as you go about your day, think about the mask you wear, the roles you play, and the stories you tell yourself. What do they reveal about your journey, your aspirations, and the challenges you face? And how can understanding those masks help you live a more authentic and meaningful life? Those are the questions we leave you with today.
Keep exploring those questions, and you might be surprised by what you discover along the way.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of masks. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.